What if surviving the week meant feeding a family with just coins in your pocket? For the next 2 hours, we're cracking open Grandma's recipe box to reveal the dirt-cheap meals that powered a generation. No fridge full of food, just pure resourcefulness on a plate. Veal Parmigiana brings a little taste of Italian-American heritage to the table, featuring breaded veal cutlets smothered in tomato sauce and melted cheese. Born in the kitchens of Italian immigrant communities in the U.S., this dish was a clever adaptation of traditional Italian recipes, tailored to American tastes. It first surfaced in the early 20th century, with Italian-American families swapping out eggplant for veal. Introduced in Italian-American eateries soon after, veal Parmigiana became a staple. The preparation? Bread those veal cutlets, fry them up, layer with marinara sauce, and a good helping of mozzarella or parmesan, then bake it until it's bubbling and golden. It hit its peak popularity in the 1950s and 1960s, often accompanied by pasta, crafting a hearty and satisfying meal. At the tail end of harvest season, when frost threatened the garden and red tomatoes were still a few days off, resourceful cooks didn't panic. They picked what they had. That's when green tomato pie became a clever, last-ditch way to avoid waste and still put dessert on the table. Surprisingly sweet and often mistaken for apple pie, this dish turned unripened tomatoes into a spiced filling that mimicked fruit with uncanny success. Sliced green tomatoes were layered with sugar, cinnamon, and a touch of vinegar or lemon juice to balance the tang. Some versions added raisins or a bit of flour to thicken the filling, and the mixture was tucked between 2 pie crusts, just like any traditional fruit pie. It was frugal, yes, but also surprisingly flavorful, which made it a well-kept secret in rural households for generations. Not everyone knew what they were eating, and sometimes it was better that way. "Eat first, ask later," was a common refrain when guests took their first bite. With tomatoes too hard to slice for sandwiches and too green to can, this pie reduced garden waste and stretched dessert possibilities during tougher months. One of the most adaptable meals to come out of the mid-century American kitchen didn't start with a recipe. It started with whatever was left in the icebox. That's how poor man's casserole earned its name. A catch-all dinner built on affordability and survival smarts, it was designed less for presentation and more for practicality. If it could fit in a dish and bake without burning, it was fair game. This casserole usually began with a base of starch, leftover rice, elbow macaroni, or diced potatoes, followed by canned vegetables, a bit of protein, often ground beef or even hot dogs, and finished with a can of cream soup or a splash of milk to bind it all together. Cheese, when it made an appearance, was often the last stubborn shred in the fridge. The brilliance wasn't in the ingredients, it was in the concept. It kept grocery bills low, made use of bits and ends, and could be reheated throughout the week without complaint. Even when times were hard, this dish gave the illusion of plenty. While poor man's casserole might not impress a food critic, it helped families stretch $1 farther than expected. It wasn't just a meal, it was a method, and in kitchens that prized thrift, it was often the week's MVP. Pork belly with cracklings is celebrated for its luxurious flavors and contrasting textures derived from the rich layers of meat and fat found in pork belly. The preparation process starts with scoring the skin and massaging it with a blend of salt, pepper, and aromatic herbs or spices to infuse flavor. The meat is slow roasted at a low temperature to render the fat and tenderize the meat, followed by a blast of high heat to crisp the skin into cracklings. This approach ensures the pork belly stays succulent, while the outer skin turns deliciously crisp. Often served sliced thickly and accompanied by applesauce or a cider reduction, this dish perfectly pairs the pork's richness with a touch of sweet acidity. The allure of pork belly with cracklings lies in the depth of its flavors and the satisfying interplay of tender meat with crispy skin. When tomato sauce wasn't in the pantry and butter wasn't an option, a surprising combination stepped in: mayonnaise and mustard. Tossed with hot spaghetti noodles and seasoned with a dash of salt and pepper, this unusual pairing became a quick-fix meal known as mayo and mustard spaghetti, which was both budget-friendly and undeniably memorable. Spaghetti itself was one of the most affordable dry goods available, filling enough to feed a family without requiring much else. Mayonnaise, often stocked in refrigerators for sandwiches and salads, brought richness and a creamy texture, while mustard added just enough tang to keep things interesting. It wasn't gourmet, but it turned plain pasta into something that felt like a complete dish without the need for meat, cheese, or expensive sauces. In working-class households, meals like this weren't about following a recipe. They were about making do with what was available. Kids grew up eating it straight from the pot, a quick meal before heading outside to play or finishing homework at the kitchen table. It may not have been a dinner guests would rave about, but for those who remember it, the taste still lingers as a reminder of simpler times and just how far a few basic ingredients could go. Hackberries were known as sugar berries. They would typically be crushed under a person's teeth so that the protein and fat-heavy seed could be consumed. Or they would be ground into powder and added to porridge or made into nut butter. They could also be turned into pemmican, and they were exceptionally nutritious. These bad boys had carbohydrates, fats, proteins, calcium, and iron packed into one. That made them a superfood during the Depression, and one that people always kept their eye out for. Hackberries could also be stored for months on end without being spoiled, and so when people would not have a use for them food-wise, they would barter them or barter the powder, paste, or pelicans they would make out of it. It had an unusual build, too. Thin, sweet skin, a little bit of pulp that you could eat, and a really hard seed in the dead center. It had a nuttiness, but you had to have some dog-like teeth to be able to bite through the seed and crush it. Bright, tangy, and effortlessly elegant lemon chicken piccata was once a dinner table favorite. With its delicate balance of citrus, butter, and briny capers, this dish turned simple ingredients into something refined. Italian-American families popularized it in mid-century kitchens, and by the 1960s, it had become a go-to recipe for home cooks looking to add a touch of sophistication to a weeknight meal. Chicken was an economical protein, but before boneless, skinless cuts were widely available, whole birds had to be broken down by hand. Piccata was traditionally made with thinly pounded chicken breasts, quickly dredged in flour and sautéed until golden. The sauce was the star, fresh lemon juice and capers combined with a silky butter reduction to create a dish that was light yet deeply flavorful. It was often served with pasta or rice, making it both practical and satisfying. So why did this dish vanish from home kitchens? Over time, complex flavors gave way to simpler, more standardized meals. The rise of processed sauces and pre-made chicken dishes made from scratch piccata seemed like more effort than it was worth. When party food had to be made on a tight budget, creativity took center stage. That's how Bolognia Cake became a thing. An unusual but surprisingly resourceful dish that turned cheap lunch meat into something that at least looked impressive. Bologna had long been a staple of budget-conscious households. It was cheap, lasted longer than fresh meats, and could be eaten cold or fried. But when it came time for gatherings, families needed something that felt festive. That's where this layered creation came in. Slices of bologna were stacked like a cake, with a frosting of cream cheese or mayo spread between each layer. Some versions had mustard mixed in for extra bite. The final touch? A decorative piping of more cream cheese around the edges, sometimes with a sprinkle of paprika for color. As odd as it sounds today, this dish reflected a time when people made the most of what they had. In an era when processed meats were more affordable than fresh cuts, bologna found its way into countless meals. For some, Bolognia Cake was a symbol of thrift and ingenuity. For others, it was simply a way to put something celebratory on the table when times were tough. Either way, it proved that with a little effort, even the humblest ingredients could be dressed up for an occasion. Exotic fruits like bananas became virtually unattainable luxuries during the economic hardships of the 1930s, prompting desperate yet brilliant substitutions from ordinary American pantries. Enter the mock banana sandwich, cleverly disguising boiled mashed parsnips sweetened with sugar and a dash of artificial banana flavoring. Parsnips, previously overlooked root vegetables that thrived in backyard gardens, found unexpected stardom in this culinary sleight of hand. Housewives quickly realized their earthy taste softened when boiled, making them surprisingly receptive to imitation fruit flavors. Banana extract, once used sparingly in desserts, was suddenly celebrated for turning humble parsnips into a believable tropical treat. It's ironic that parsnips were elevated from root-cellar obscurity to sandwich fame simply because real bananas became too costly for most American tables. Historical records show these sandwiches appeared regularly in Depression-era cookbooks, praised as creative alternatives that allowed families to maintain dietary variety despite limited budgets. Of course, modern taste buds might question whether parsnips truly captured the banana experience. After all, impersonating fruit is tough business. But many Depression-era children reportedly enjoyed the illusion enough to ask for seconds. Beavertail soup has history in several different areas that go back several different long roads. From indigenous peoples to French trappers and European poachers, fur traders, it seemed like everybody wanted a piece of the beaver pie, if not the whole thing outright. Beaver tails are a prized possession in indigenous culture and have been a long-respected part of that culture for as far back as anyone can remember. Now, of course, there's something in it for them too. Beaver tail fat happens to be extremely rich in fat, and a lot of tribes relied on it as one of their most important and accessible sources of energy. Despite what you might think or not think about the little rodent, their tails were also valued for their fur, and beavers fetched quite a decent price on the market. I mean, catching one of these meant you were going to have a good week, but if you caught yourself a few, or an entire bundle, then you were looking at a petty lucrative sum. It's a bit sad to say, but that's really just how it went down. Despite that, beavertail soup wasn't a source of constant discontent about how they're poaching all the beavers. It was also one of people's biggest comforts. Now, one of the most common uses of beaver tails was the soup you would make out of it. This was an emergency ration, supper, relief in the winter, a medicinal broth, and comfort food all in one. It was a very versatile recipe that had more uses than the next 10 things we can cook up, which is exactly why I think it's worth bringing back. Few vegetables can claim to have fed both people and livestock, but Mongolwurzel did just that. This oversized, rough-skinned beet was once a common sight on farms, valued for its ability to grow in poor soil and provide food through harsh winters. While mainly grown as animal fodder, Mongolwurzel wasn't just for cows and pigs. During tough times, it became an important source of nutrition for families, especially in Europe and early America. When boiled or roasted, its flesh turned tender and slightly sweet, tasting like a cross between a beet and a turnip. Some cooked it in stews, while others mashed it with butter, turning it into a hearty side dish. Even the greens were edible, prepared just like Swiss chard. So why did this giant beet disappear from dinner tables? As farming became more industrialized, Mongolwurzel was pushed aside for more refined crops. Its rough, irregular shape didn't fit the modern produce aisle, and its reputation as animal feed made it less appealing. But for those who still grow it, Mongolwurzel is a reminder of a time when nothing went to waste. A vegetable that could feed a farm, a family, and everything in between. Corn was once the backbone of the rural American diet, and families knew how to make it work in just about every form imaginable. One of the most enduring and economical ways to stretch a bag of cornmeal was cornmeal mush with molasses. This dish, deceptively simple, was a staple on tables from Appalachia to the Midwest, especially during times when sugar was scarce and grocery lists were kept intentionally short. Cornmeal mush started with just 2 ingredients, cornmeal and water. Stirred over heat until thick and smooth, it could be poured into a pan to set, then sliced and fried the next day. But when served hot and fresh, a drizzle of molasses turned it into a breakfast or supper that offered comfort without cost. Molasses, often cheaper than refined sugar, added a deep sweetness, and more importantly, iron and minerals to a meal otherwise made from little. It was filling, adaptable, and incredibly frugal. Any leftovers could be reused, making it a true zero-waste option in kitchens where every scoop mattered. As one old saying went, mush in the morning meant no one went hungry by night. Though cornmeal mush with molasses has largely disappeared from modern mealtimes, it once stood as a symbol of how far a penny's worth of grain and a spoonful of syrup could carry a family. Eggplant parmesan is a hearty Italian-American favorite that layers crispy breaded eggplant slices with marinara sauce and cheese. This vegetarian delight originally hails from southern Italy, known there as melanzane alla parmigiana, and made its way to American shores with Italian immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The classic approach involves slicing the eggplant, breading it, and frying it until it's just the right shade of golden brown. These crispy slices are then layered with marinara sauce and a generous helping of mozzarella or parmesan, and baked until the cheese bubbles with joy. Eggplant parmesan became a staple in meatless meal traditions, particularly appreciated during the Lenten season among Catholic families in America. Gaining a firm foothold in American Italian eateries during the 20th century, it often comes served with a side of pasta or bread, rounding out a truly satisfying meal. Root vegetables were once the unsung heroes of the dinner table, especially when meat was scarce and grocery budgets ran thin. In that context, turnip and potato hash was a no-nonsense solution that brought together two of the cheapest and most accessible ingredients around. It wasn't glamorous, but it was dependable, and that counted for a lot when the pantry was down to the basics. Turnips, often overlooked today, were valued for their long shelf life and low cost. Paired with potatoes, another reliable staple, they formed the backbone of this skillet-fried hash. Cubed, boiled, and browned together with onions or leftover fat from breakfast, the mixture turned crisp at the edges and tender inside. It was seasoned with salt, pepper, and whatever else was on hand, from garlic powder to a spoonful of drippings, saved in a coffee can. This dish didn't rely on measurements or manuals. It relied on instinct and thrift. If you had a little leftover meat, it went in. If not, nobody blinked. The goal was always the same: stretch what you had and waste nothing. Though turnip and potato hash has quietly disappeared from most modern menus, it once represented a kind of culinary common sense. It made the most of the root cellar and filled bellies without draining wallets, a humble classic forged by necessity. In eras when sugar was precious and eggs were a luxury, resourceful cooks reached deep into the pantry and pulled out something unexpected: vinegar. That surprising staple gave rise to vinegar dumplings, a dessert born not out of abundance, but ingenuity. With no fruit on hand and pies out of reach, this simple recipe gave families a way to end a meal with something sweet, using the bare minimum. The dough was made with flour, baking powder, water, and a pinch of salt. Nothing fancy, just the basics. Dropped into a simmering syrup of water, sugar, butter, and vinegar, the dumplings cooked until tender, absorbing the tangy sweetness of the sauce. The vinegar added brightness and helped balance the sugary base, creating a complex flavor that felt surprisingly indulgent for such modest ingredients. This dish was often handed down from mother to daughter, more by demonstration than recipe. No one wrote it down. They just knew it by feel. A little more flour here, a splash less vinegar there. It was the kind of dessert that came together quickly and disappeared even faster. Though vinegar dumplings rarely show up on modern tables, they once stood as a reminder that dessert didn't need to be fancy. It just needed to be clever. Cornish Game Hen, a petite and elegant poultry choice, typically weighs no more than 2 pounds and is ideal for serving as an individual portion, making it perfect for an upscale dinner. These hens are usually roasted whole, seasoned lightly with herbs like thyme and sage, and basted in butter to achieve a crispy, golden skin while keeping the meat juicy and tender. The cavity may be stuffed with a flavorful blend of breadcrumbs, chopped vegetables, and herbs, enriching the meat during cooking. The cooking process often involves high-temperature roasting to crisp the skin, followed by a resting period before serving to ensure the meat remains moist. Serving Cornish game hens on a bed of wild rice or alongside roasted vegetables allows their delicate flavors to shine, making them a favored choice for intimate dining and special occasions due to their ideal portion size and visually appealing presentation. Mid-century America had a love affair with convenience, and nothing sold homemakers on a recipe faster than a catchy advertising campaign. In the 1960s, Wesson Oil promoted a dish that promised flavor, affordability, and, of course, a little Wessonality. It started with ground beef, one of the most budget-friendly proteins of the era, mixed with canned green beans and tomato soup, then topped with a generous handful of crushed potato chips. A little crunch, a little sauce, and a whole lot of practicality. Wessonality Surprise was designed for speed and efficiency. No complicated steps, no long cooking times. Just a few pantry staples thrown together and baked into something that resembled a casserole. Canned green beans, already a staple in American kitchens, made the dish feel like a balanced meal, while the condensed tomato soup added a rich, slightly sweet tang. For families in the 60s, this kind of cooking was about making every dollar count. It was fast, it was filling, and thanks to Wesson's marketing, it became one of many quirky ad-driven meals that defined a generation of home cooking. A little strange? Maybe. But for busy families, it worked. Eggs and Nanny berries were a really valuable fruit. When nanny berries would be fully ripe, they were inherently very soft and sweet. This made them a wonderful snack for nomadic tribes, farmers, and foragers. People going on supply runs would always try to pick out nanny berries wherever they would find them. Nanny berries looked like small blue plums with a black tint, and they were something that ripened in late fall. They had a very unique flavor and texture as well. The soft, custard-like sensation you would get when biting into it, along with the fig-like taste, made it a very lovable fruit for many. Plus, these were a good source of energy and fiber, meaning they kept you more active and full for longer, and during a hard-working day in the Depression, which was just every day, what more could you ask for? Dishes come from necessity, and few ingredients are as dependable as potatoes. For generations, scalloped potatoes were a staple at homecoming dinners, potlucks, and Sunday feasts. Thinly sliced and baked in a rich, velvety sauce, they were a testament to the idea that simple ingredients, when treated right, could feel downright luxurious. Potatoes were the backbone of many American kitchens. They were cheap, easy to store, and could feed an entire family without much effort. The addition of a creamy sauce, made from milk, butter, and a touch of garlic, elevated this humble dish into something special. Some versions kept it simple, while others included layers of cheese, turning it into a gooey, golden masterpiece. Either way, it was a comforting, belly-filling side that paired well with just about any main course. The cooking process required patience. Proper scalloped potatoes weren't rushed. Each layer had to absorb the sauce, and the top needed time to develop that perfect golden crust. But as boxed potato mixes and instant gratins took over, homemade scalloped potatoes started to fade from dinner tables. When there was nothing left but the basics, survival meals had to be simple. Grits and water was about as bare bones as it got. No butter, no milk, just ground corn simmered in water until it thickened into something edible. Grits had long been a staple in the South, where corn was abundant and cheap. Normally, they were cooked with milk or broth for flavor, but when times were hard, even those additions were a luxury. Water had to do. A pinch of salt, if available, might cut the blandness. Some families thinned them out to make the pot last longer, while others let them cook down into a thicker porridge for a more filling meal. There was ingenuity behind this dish. Grits were not only affordable, but they expanded when cooked, making a little go a long way. Leftovers weren't wasted either. Cooled and hardened grits could be sliced and fried the next day, turning yesterday's meal into something with a bit of crunch. For many, grits and water was a meal born out of necessity, but it carried meaning beyond hunger. It was a reminder of resilience, of stretching every ingredient, of doing what had to be done. Cornmeal, the affordable cornerstone of many Depression-era pantries, regularly transformed from bland porridge into crispy delights. One creative result was the cornmeal mush sandwich, a hearty sandwich featuring leftover cornmeal mush fried until crisp, then placed snugly between bread slices. Though today's diners might chuckle at the idea of mush becoming sandwich-worthy, during the Great Depression, cornmeal mush was more than an economical meal. It was practically survival food, providing necessary calories at minimal cost. Resourceful homemakers routinely prepared large batches, knowing the leftovers, once cooled and firm, could easily be sliced and fried for future meals. Historical newspapers frequently touted cornmeal as the American staple, humorously reassuring housewives they could count on cornmeal mush in lean times, even when neighbors proved less reliable. The cleverness came when leftover mush was fried, converting it from a monotonous dish into an appealing, crunchy patty that gave texture and flavor to humble sandwiches. Potato candy might sound like one of the most genuinely confusing things ever to you, but it's as real as it gets. Potato candy is a very nostalgic confection that originated somewhere in the Appalachia a very long time ago, but it got picked up by the Pennsylvania Dutch communities in the early parts of the 20th century. It was a Depression-era recipe that was just made with mashed potatoes instead of any other kinds of expensive ingredients. You had your nuts and butter, but that was it. Most of the famous versions of this dish just consist of sugary and soft potato-based dough that's been soaked in peanut butter. What does stand out about this dish is the unique pinwheel shape that it has, though. It works out surprisingly well for this dish because the potato itself actually doesn't have a lot of flavor once it gets mixed in with the powdered sugar. It has a starchy undertone, but that's mostly it. Your first most prominent tastes are going to be a strong splash of vanilla and a warm bakery-like fragrance created by the peanut butter, sugary dough, and the extract. It's about as hard as you would expect a potato candy to be, but it's also way better than you would give it credit. I don't know, I think I might make this one a regular in my kitchen. What about you? Not an artichoke, not from Jerusalem. Jerusalem artichokes or sunchokes have one of the most misleading names in the vegetable world. This knobby, unassuming tuber comes from a species of sunflower native to North America, and for centuries, it was a vital food source for indigenous tribes and early settlers. With a crisp texture when raw and a nutty, slightly sweet flavor when cooked, it was a versatile ingredient that required almost no effort to grow. Unlike potatoes, which needed replanting each season, sunchokes spread aggressively underground, coming back year after year. They could be roasted, boiled, or mashed into soups, and because they contained inulin instead of starch, they were a great option for those avoiding traditional carbohydrates. Some compared their taste to water chestnuts, while others found them similar to artichoke hearts. Despite their benefits, sunchokes never reached the same level of fame as their starchy counterparts. Their knobby, irregular shape made them harder to clean and store, and their high inulin content led to some unfortunate digestive consequences, earning them the nickname fartichokes. As commercial farming focused on crops that were easier to sell, sunchokes faded from mainstream kitchens. In the heart of the Great Depression, when pantries were bare and wallets were even emptier, home bakers got inventive in ways most modern cooks wouldn't dare attempt. Boiled water pie was one of those creations, a dessert made not with luxury, but with logic. Sugar, flour, butter, and water formed the base, and a bit of vanilla gave it just enough character to make folks forget it was essentially a pie made with hot water and hope. This wasn't a flaky, fruit-filled pastry to impress the neighbors. It was a triumph of ingenuity, born from empty cupboards and an unwavering desire to serve something sweet at the end of a hard day. The filling, thickened with flour and set in a basic pie crust, created a gelatinous texture, almost like a custard's frugal cousin. If there was no butter, lard worked. No vanilla? A pinch of cinnamon did the trick. Despite its simplicity, boiled water pie became a symbol of doing more with less. It used no eggs, no milk, and no exotic ingredients, just the bare bones of a dessert and a good deal of perseverance. This pie stood as quiet proof that even during the leanest seasons, people still found ways to sweeten life, one slice at a time. Shepherd's pie is a homely casserole crafted with ground meat and vegetables, crowned with a layer of mashed potatoes. Originally from the United Kingdom and dating back to the late 18th century, this dish traditionally uses lamb, as the name shepherd suggests, differentiating it from cottage pie, which uses beef. The typical preparation involves sautéing ground lamb with onions, carrots, and peas, then topping it with a creamy layer of mashed potatoes and baking it until it achieves a golden color. Shepherd's pie was a dining staple in both British and American homes throughout the 1970s, offering a robust and comforting meal. It gained particular favor during the colder months, providing a warming, comforting dish perfect for family dinners or gatherings where its layered textures and flavors were particularly appreciated. Households where meat was a rare luxury and leftovers were a way of life, nothing went to waste, not even the morning oatmeal. That's where oatmeal patties entered the picture. Made from leftover cooked oats, a few beaten eggs, breadcrumbs, and whatever seasonings were within arm's reach, these patties turned a humble breakfast item into a surprisingly satisfying dinner or side dish. It wasn't glamorous, but it got the job done. Oats were, and still are, one of the most affordable pantry staples. They store well, cook fast, and offer fiber and protein without the price tag of meat or dairy. By the mid-20th century, many frugal families learned to repurpose them creatively. Frying leftover oatmeal into patties not only stretched resources, but also added texture and flavor to a meal that might otherwise feel one note. Often pan-fried in bacon drippings or lard, the patties were crisp on the outside, soft inside, and frequently served with gravy or a splash of ketchup. Some versions even added grated onion or cheese when available, making the dish slightly more decadent, by Depression standards at least. Rabbit stew is a beloved traditional dish in various cultures, renowned for its hearty and comforting nature. This stew typically features tender pieces of rabbit slow-cooked with onions, garlic, and aromatic herbs like rosemary or thyme, which subtly enhance the mild flavor of the rabbit. Additional vegetables such as carrots, celery, and potatoes often join the mix, creating a robust, one-pot meal. The stewing liquid, usually wine or stock, enriches the dish, lending depth and complexity as it simmers. Rabbit meat, known for its leanness and delicacy, benefits greatly from the slow cooking process, becoming incredibly tender and infused with the rich flavors of the broth and vegetables. Rabbit stew is especially appreciated during the colder months or in rural settings where rabbit is a common game meat. Canned peas weren't just a side dish in the 1960s. They were the foundation of a meal all on their own. When budgets were tight, they were mashed, mixed with flour and egg, and pan-fried into crispy little fritters. Served with a dollop of ketchup or a drizzle of gravy, pea fritters turned one of the most basic pantry staples into something warm, filling, and just a little more exciting than plain peas on a plate. Canned vegetables were a staple in working-class homes. They were cheap, had a long shelf life, and didn't require refrigeration. Peas, in particular, were easy to find and packed with vitamins, making them a practical choice for families trying to stretch meals without sacrificing nutrition. Binding them with egg and flour created a batter that crisped up beautifully in a hot skillet, transforming soft, mushy peas into something with real texture. For kids, it was a way to eat vegetables without much complaint, especially if there was ketchup involved. For parents, it was an affordable, no-fuss solution that could be made in minutes. Some families seasoned them simply with salt and pepper, while others added a little onion or garlic for extra flavor. Autumn olive, also known as the Elaeagnus umbellata, which sounds either like a Harry Potter spell or the title of an obscure Barbie movie, is not an olive. This is a small red berry with tiny silver speckles that grows on a shrub that's got a hankering for nitrogen. It was something that wasn't native to our land. It was introduced originally by Asian immigrants. Ever since that, autumn olives have spread rapidly across the eastern and central U.S. They thrive in the kind of climate most other fruits would die in. Despite that, it's considered an invasive species because it takes up space. During the Depression, though, people really did not like risking it. A failed harvest would mean terrible things for you and yours, so it was a lot easier to just go with the kind of fruit that you knew would work. The berries would also ripen all the way in the late summer to fall. Taste-wise, they were reminiscent of cranberries with a bit of pomegranate thrown in. They were eaten fresh, but they were used more for bartering. It's because they were easy to gather in large quantities, and they were also a great supplement in diets. People used them to boost their immune health, which helped things. For families stretching their grocery budget, few meals delivered as much flavor and comfort as these unusual-looking meatballs. A product of the Great Depression and wartime rationing, porcupine meatballs were a creative way to make ground beef go further. Mixing rice into the meat wasn't just for texture. It bulked up the meal, making a pound of beef feed more mouths. Rice was an affordable pantry staple, and when the meatballs simmered in a tangy tomato sauce, the grains softened and expanded, giving them their signature spiky appearance. Despite the name, no porcupines were harmed in the making of this dish. Just a bit of kitchen ingenuity at work. Some recipes used canned tomato soup for a mild, creamy sauce, while others relied on crushed tomatoes and Worcestershire sauce for a sharper kick. Either way, the slow cooking process allowed the flavors to meld into a hearty, stick-to-your-ribs meal. For decades, this dish was a go-to for busy home cooks. It was easy, required minimal ingredients, and could be made in one pot, ideal for feeding a growing family. But as convenience foods and pre-made meatballs filled grocery store freezers, the homemade version started to disappear. Some of the best. There was a time when a sandwich didn't mean deli meats or fancy spreads. It meant whatever you had on hand, sometimes just 2 slices of bread and a few desperate ingredients. That's how onion and ketchup sandwiches became a meal. During the Great Depression, fresh vegetables were scarce, but onions were cheap and stored well. Ketchup, often considered a condiment today, was one of the few affordable ways to add a little flavor to otherwise bland meals. Put them together between slices of bread, and it became a poor man's sandwich, sweet, tangy, and just sharp enough to remind you it wasn't quite a meal, but it would do. There was ingenuity behind this simple combination. Ketchup, made mostly of tomatoes and vinegar, gave a touch of acidity and sweetness, while onions provided a crunch and some much-needed bite. For many, this wasn't just a makeshift meal, it was a way to stretch ingredients when grocery money had run dry. Some families added salt and pepper for extra taste, while others toasted the bread to make it feel more substantial. For those who ate them, onion and ketchup sandwiches were a symbol of making do, of finding a way to put something between 2 slices of bread when times were at their hardest. In the 1930s, leftovers weren't something you tossed, they were tomorrow's lunch. That mentality gave birth to dishes like the cold baked bean sandwich, a Depression-era staple composed of leftover baked beans spread generously between bread slices. Though beans today might evoke images of summertime barbecues, in Depression kitchens, they symbolized frugality and survival. Beans were economical powerhouses, affordable, nutritious, and easy to cook in large batches. Families routinely simmered huge pots, using beans for multiple meals, stretching their budgets and pantries to their absolute limits. After hot bean suppers, resourceful homemakers cleverly repurposed any remnants, spreading them cold onto bread to create an easy, protein-rich sandwich for lunchboxes the next day. Newspapers of the period promoted beans as an essential pantry staple, boasting about their nutritional benefits and cost-effectiveness, while quietly ignoring their less glamorous qualities, perhaps for the best. Oddly enough, baked beans in sandwiches wasn't an entirely new idea. British households had long enjoyed bean buddies, proving thriftiness travels well. Carrot marmalade could never quite rise to the heights of carrot cake or cobbler, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have a very valid place in history and this list. So carrot marmalade used to be something that originated and came to us from Britain, but it actually got really popular in North America. Plus, this is still a recipe set in our grandparents' time. Especially if your grandparents were from the early parts of the 21st century, when wartime rationing had become the norm for everyone's daily routine. In those times, citrus fruits had become really scarce because most people had just plucked the markets and harvests dry. The popular alternative started to be carrots for how naturally sweet they were. Plus, they had a lot of pectin, which is something people used in this marmalade. The idea is to cook the carrots with a mix of zest and sugar until it hits this almost jam-like consistency. It's almost just kind of like a tart spread, really, but with all the magic of carrots. Plus, did you know people used to use marmalade for cake fillings? It's pretty much the precursor to carrot cakes. There was a time when gardens weren't just filled with mild, leafy greens. Some had a bite. Sorrel, a tangy, lemony herb, was once a kitchen staple, adding a burst of acidity long before citrus was widely available. With its sharp, almost sour taste, it was a favorite for soups, sauces, and even simple salads, offering a refreshing contrast to heavier dishes. Unlike many garden greens, sorrel wasn't just for fresh eating. Its tartness intensified when cooked, making it a key ingredient in old-world recipes like French sorrel soup, a silky, velvety dish often finished with cream. In Eastern Europe, it was blended into stews and borscht, giving broths a natural brightness. Pioneers and homesteaders loved it for its resilience. One of the first greens to appear in spring, sorrel provided much-needed vitamins after harsh winters. So why did it fade from American tables? Its bold flavor didn't fit the growing preference for milder greens like spinach and lettuce. Plus, sorrel's high oxalic acid content, while safe in moderation, gave it a reputation for being too strong for everyday meals. Today, it lingers mostly in specialty gardens and gourmet kitchens, waiting for a comeback. When refrigeration was unreliable and grocery runs weren't guaranteed, families leaned on ingredients that could last for weeks or even months without spoiling. That's how salt pork and potato stew found its way into so many cast-iron pots across America. Salt pork, a cured cut of fatty meat, was cheap, shelf-stable, and added flavor to even the blandest of meals. Combined with hearty potatoes, onions, and water, it created a stew that could feed a whole family without breaking the bank. The key to this dish wasn't extravagance, it was economy. Salt pork could be rendered for its fat, browned for texture, and used sparingly to add depth to a meal otherwise dominated by starch. Potatoes, the workhorse of the poor man's pantry, offered bulk and nourishment, and were often grown right in the backyard. In some versions, a carrot or two might sneak in, but for many families, this stew relied on whatever root vegetables hadn't gone soft yet. Waste wasn't an option. Leftover broth could be saved and reused as the base for another day's meal. Though salt pork and potato stew isn't a regular on today's dinner tables, it once served as a practical solution to hunger, using preserved meat and humble vegetables to stretch both flavor and resources, one ladle at a time. Duck à l'orange is a venerable French dish that pairs roasted duck breast with a vibrant, tangy orange sauce. Its rich history dates back to the 19th century, enjoying popularity among French aristocrats. The duck is typically roasted to achieve a crispy exterior, while the sauce is crafted from a reduction of orange juice, stock, and a hint of Grand Marnier or Cointreau. By the 1970s, this dish had become a hallmark of sophisticated dining, frequently chosen for elegant dinner parties or upscale restaurants. The delightful contrast between the rich, savory duck and the fresh, citrusy sauce creates an unforgettable flavor profile that showcases the dish's aristocratic French origins. The meticulous preparation and exquisite presentation make duck à l'orange a true culinary masterpiece. Chicken Kiev packs a punch with its chicken breasts stuffed with herbed butter, all wrapped up in a crispy breadcrumb coating. The dish stirs up a bit of a debate about its roots. Some folks reckon it was whipped up by French chefs back in the early 19th century, while others swear it was crafted by a Ukrainian chef in a Moscow kitchen in the early 20th century. Regardless of its backstory, Chicken Kiev began turning heads internationally around mid-20th century, becoming the go-to at dinner parties and special events. The traditional way to do it? Flatten those chicken breasts, tuck in a mix of butter, garlic, and herbs, roll them up, bread them, and fry to a golden brown. When sliced, the butter inside just bursts out, making a rich, flavorful sauce. By the 1960s, it had secured its spot on menus across America, often served with a side of veggie. Oysters Rockefeller consists of succulent oysters on the half shell, topped with a rich, buttery mixture of finely chopped herbs and breadcrumbs, then baked or broiled until golden. Originating in 1899 at Antoine's in New Orleans, one of America's historic restaurants, the dish's exact recipe remains a secret, but typically includes spinach, celery, and sometimes an anise-flavored liqueur, creating a luxurious topping. The oysters are gently poached in their shells to retain moisture, then crowned with this seasoned blend. After assembling, they are broiled until the topping bubbles and browns slightly, offering a delightful contrast in textures between the creamy, tender oyster and the crisp, flavorful topping. Oysters Rockefeller is not only a treat for the palate, but also a creative celebration of local ingredients. elevating the simple oyster to a decadent culinary experience. At a glance, it looked like fried chicken on a stick. But take one bite, and the secret was out. There wasn't a shred of chicken in sight. In the 1960s, when poultry prices soared, working-class families in industrial cities like Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Detroit turned to a clever alternative: skewered, breaded, and fried pork or veal, known as city chicken. The name was a bit of a joke. Chicken was considered a luxury in certain areas, but pork and veal, those were cheap, especially in regions with a strong meatpacking industry. But appearance mattered, and with a little ingenuity, cubed cuts of meat were threaded onto wooden skewers, giving the illusion of a drumstick. Once dredged in flour, dipped in egg wash, and coated in breadcrumbs, it was pan-fried until golden brown and crispy. Some families took it a step further, baking the skewers in a bit of broth for extra tenderness. Eastern European immigrants had been making versions of it since the early 20th century, and by the 1960s it was a staple at Sunday dinners and potlucks. It might not have been real chicken, but in a time when stretching a dollar mattered more than labels, it didn't need to be. Hoover stew was one of those dishes that anyone could afford to make, so it is no wonder that the stew was a common item in the Great Depression. Hoover stew had two signature traits. It could feed the whole family, and you could have the dish without exceeding the monthly budget. As for the recipe, the dish involved using scraps and leftovers to increase savings and recycling in a time when households could not afford a lot. You did not need many spices, and you could easily use leftover meats. In an America where banks were going bankrupt and the job market was hopeless, the stew was a welcome addition. Obviously, it would be a popular choice among many households, as our older viewers might still remember. Fortunately, as economic stability came back, Hoover stew went away from tables in favor of more flavorful and varied stews. Let's start the video with everyone's favorite peach cobbler. Whether made with fresh, juicy peaches at the height of summer or canned peaches during the off-season, this dessert never failed to bring warmth to the table. Grandmas have always been great at making those labor-intensive meals, but this one was a laid-back treat that they whipped up in minutes. Yeah, even you can make it. Just take a few peaches, toss them with sugar and spices, and top with dollops of biscuit dough. This one was served best with a side of vanilla ice cream. Some grandmas even added a splash of bourbon to make the cobbler extra special. Plus, this dessert became so popular that there is even a day dedicated to it. April 13th is National Peach Cobbler Day in the United States, so mark your calendars and call your grandmas for some childhood nostalgia. Staple of working-class kitchens, this hearty one-dish meal was built on the kind of ingredients that stretched a family's budget without sacrificing flavor. Cabbage, potatoes, and smoked sausage, three of the most economical and widely available foods, came together in layers, baked slowly in a rich mustard cream sauce. The result was a rustic, deeply satisfying dish that filled bellies and kept families warm through colder months. Cabbage was a practical ingredient, valued for its long shelf life and versatility. When paired with smoky seasoned sausage and starchy potatoes, it created a meal that was both inexpensive and packed with flavor. The mustard-infused cream sauce added a tangy richness, tying everything together. Some home cooks added a dash of vinegar for brightness, while others incorporated cheese for extra indulgence. No matter the variation, this dish was proof that humble ingredients could create something truly special. Why did it fall out of favor? The rise of prepackaged meals and low-carb trends made cabbage-heavy dishes less common, and as quick stovetop meals replaced slow-baked casseroles, this once popular dish faded from view. When fresh meat was a luxury and meals had to be made quickly, canned goods became a lifeline. Spam and noodles was one of those simple, no-frills meals that got the job done. Salty, filling, and just enough to keep hunger at bay. Spam had been around since the late 1930s, but it gained real traction during World War II when fresh meat was rationed. It was cheap, shelf-stable, and packed with enough fat and salt to last. For many families struggling to make ends meet, it became a reliable protein source. When paired with boiled noodles, usually whatever was on hand, from egg noodles to macaroni, it became a meal that could stretch for days. The preparation was as basic as it gets. The Spam was diced and fried in a pan until browned, then tossed with cooked noodles. If there was butter, that went in too. If not, a splash of whatever drippings were available did the trick. Some families got creative, adding canned peas or a sprinkle of black pepper for variety. Spam and noodles wasn't a gourmet dish. It was a reminder of resilience, of meals made from necessity, and of the days when a can of processed meat. When eggs became scarce during the Depression, Americans discovered a sandwich that cleverly defied logic, an eggless egg salad sandwich. At its heart, it was a crafty blend of crumbled tofu or leftover mashed potatoes combined with mustard, homemade mayonnaise substitutes, and chopped pickles. Though tofu may seem surprisingly trendy now, it had quietly existed in America since the late 1800s, mostly unnoticed until economic necessity thrust it into the spotlight. Families that couldn't access tofu creatively repurposed leftover mashed potatoes, turning yesterday's side dish into a satisfying sandwich filling. Depression-era homemakers found mustard's sharp bite and pickles' tanginess essential in creating the illusion of traditional egg salad flavor, ingeniously masking the absence of real eggs. Interestingly, mayonnaise substitutes, often a mixture of flour paste, vinegar, and seasoning, were promoted widely through government pamphlets and cooking columns as money-saving kitchen miracles. Food writers enthusiastically suggested these eggless spreads provided all of the flavor, none of the hen, helping families laugh through tough culinary adjustments. Pepper pot soup is a really nice soup. It has such strong ties to Philadelphia and the Caribbean cuisine that was once really popular there in the 20th century, and to be honest, still is. This was a recipe that was actually a favorite of the people during the Revolutionary War, and the reason for that was a little interesting bit of trivia. See, George Washington's troops, when they were stationed at Valley Forge, would famously eat a lot of pepper pot soup to the point where it became something of a local rumor. Now, the dish on its own has very little American roots, if any. It's a West African and Caribbean dish through and through. If I had to describe the experience of it in one way, it would be like constantly drinking liquid chili flakes, or like just drinking a much better version of instant ramen noodle broth. The thing is, each person's recipe was really unique to them. Overall, though, it was basically just a really complex dish that has a very distinctly peppery bite to it. It's never overwhelming, but it does linger in your mouth a lot. It's good that it's backed up by so many herbal spices to help keep that at bay, though, because otherwise I think it would get pretty old pretty fast. Before spinach took over as the leafy green of choice, another plant dominated gardens and wild fields alike. Goosefoot, better known as lamb's quarters, was once a widely cultivated vegetable, packed with vitamins and minerals. For centuries, it was a reliable source of nutrition, thriving in almost any soil and growing faster than most cultivated greens. Rich in iron, calcium, and protein, lamb's quarters was a natural multivitamin, providing nourishment long before grocery store supplements existed. Farmers and home cooks used it much like spinach, steamed, sautéed, or tossed into soups and stews. The tender young leaves had a mild, slightly earthy flavor, making them perfect for fresh salads or even mixed into bread and porridge. Some cultures ground its tiny seeds into flour, using it as a grain substitute. Despite its usefulness, lamb's quarters disappeared from the dinner table as spinach rose in popularity. Spinach was easier to market, had a more uniform appearance, and didn't come with the stigma of being a weed. Over time, what was once a nutritious staple became something people pulled from their gardens instead of harvested. In southern kitchens, a can of tomatoes and a bit of flour could go a long way. That's where tomato gravy and biscuits came in, a dish that made the most of simple staples when meat was scarce and money was even scarcer. Born out of the Great Depression and carried through hard times in rural America, this meal represented both necessity and culinary creativity, turning pantry basics into a filling breakfast, lunch, or dinner. The gravy was typically made by cooking down canned or fresh tomatoes with bacon grease or lard, then thickened with flour and water or milk. It was poured generously over biscuits, usually made from scratch using flour, lard, and buttermilk. Nothing went to waste. Leftover biscuits from the day before were often reheated and revived under a ladle of warm, tangy sauce. It wasn't meant to impress guests, but it sure impressed empty stomachs. In fact, the acidity of the tomatoes helped cut through the richness of the fat, creating a balance that kept folks coming back, even if it was the third time that week. Tomato gravy and biscuits taught generations that a humble meal could still be hearty, honest, and deeply satisfying. Crab Louie, also known as the King of Salads, is a classic that originated on the U.S. West Coast in the early 20th century. While its birthplace is up for debate, some say the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, others point to Solari's restaurant in Seattle. It always features Dungeness crab, hard-boiled eggs, asparagus, tomatoes, and a creamy dressing made from mayonnaise, chili sauce, and spices. Crab Louie was dubbed the King of Salads by the San Francisco Chronicle in 1914, a nod to its deluxe ingredients and popularity among the elite. It first gained traction in the 1920s and 1930s, becoming a favored dish for lighter dinners or luncheons. The mix of crisp lettuce, savory crab, and tangy dressing, served up in an elegant presentation, made it a must-have at many a high-end restaurant and social gathering. Refrigeration was unreliable and grocery runs weren't guaranteed. Families leaned on ingredients that could last for weeks or even months without spoiling. That's how salt pork and potato stew found its way into so many cast-iron pots across America. Salt pork, a cured cut of fatty meat, was cheap, shelf-stable, and added flavor to even the blandest of meals. Combined with hearty potatoes, onions, and water, it created a stew that could feed a whole family without breaking the bank. The key to this dish wasn't extravagance, it was economy. Salt pork could be rendered for its fat, browned for texture, and used sparingly to add depth to a meal otherwise dominated by starch. Potatoes, the workhorse of the poor man's pantry, offered bulk and nourishment, and were often grown right in the backyard. In some versions, a carrot or two might sneak in, but for many families, this stew relied on whatever root vegetables hadn't gone soft yet. Waste wasn't an option. Leftover broth could be saved and reused as the base for another day's meal. Though salt pork and potato stew isn't a regular on today's dinner tables, it once served as a practical solution to hunger, using preserved meat and humble vegetables to stretch both flavor and resources, one ladle at a time. Tornados Rossini is an indulgent reflection of haute cuisine, named after the gourmet aficionado and renowned composer Gioacchino Rossini. Crafted by the legendary chef Auguste Escoffier in Paris, this dish features a medallion of beef tenderloin, cooked in butter and crowned with a slice of sumptuous foie gras. Resting on a crouton that soaks up the juices, the tornados is lavished with a rich Madeira demi-glace that's infused with truffles and finished with butter, then garnished with fresh truffle slices. The preparation of this dish demands precision. The beef tenderloin seared to perfection, the foie gras just melting, and the sauce richly coating each component. Tornados Rossini not only showcases the luxury of its ingredients, but also the skill in combining them to deliver a dish that is as opulent in taste as it is in history. When it came to stretching a dollar, no part of the animal went to waste. Pig's feet, one of the cheapest cuts available, were a staple in rural working-class homes. Boiled until tender, then breaded and fried, they transformed from tough and bony to crispy on the outside, rich and gelatinous on the inside. For families who had to make do with what they had, breaded pig's feet was as practical as it was flavorful. Offal meats like pig's feet were widely available and far more affordable than prime cuts. The long boiling process broke down the connective tissue, turning what was once tough and chewy into something melt-in-your-mouth tender. The breading and frying added texture, making it feel less like survival food and more like a proper meal. Served with mustard or vinegar, the tang balanced out the richness, while some families paired it with a side of potatoes or greens. For many, this wasn't just a meal, it was a tradition. Whether eaten at a family table or bought from a local butcher's counter, it was a reminder of a time when food was respected, nothing was wasted, and even the humblest ingredients could be turned into something worth savoring. Buffalo berries, on the other hand, were a vital food source for people who had been living on the Great Plains. They were the kind of fruit you would see in North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Nebraska, and Wyoming, which aren't rates we've mentioned so far, right? While most of the fruits on here prefer acidic, moist soil, this one wants to be different rapidly, so it picks dry and alkaline soil. Every family has one of those, you know? Anyway, indigenous communities had been planting buffalo berries since way before the Depression. It was a common harvest for foragers and homesteaders. They were either red or yellow, and they had an intensely tart-like taste. What you couldn't do was just eat them right off the bat, though. They had to be made into jelly, dried, and ground into pemmican, which was just mixing it with animal fat and dried meat. Besides that, people made buffalo berry pudding out of it. Both of those dishes are indigenous recipes, and they involve maximizing their energy gains. Pemmican has animal fat and dried meat mixed in, making it an incredibly high-energy food. The pudding is something that gets turned into a frothy pudding by whipping it enough with sugar. People used to call it Indian ice cream, if you can believe it. All of these things were bartered because it was rare to see them in the Depression in those areas. There was a time when Sunday dinner wasn't complete without a plate of slow-cooked, gravy-drenched pork chops. Smothered in rich, savory onion gravy and served alongside a heaping portion of mashed potatoes, this dish was a cornerstone of Southern home cooking. It was an experience, one that filled the kitchen with the unmistakable aroma of comfort. Pork was an affordable alternative to beef, making it a practical choice for families looking to stretch their grocery budget. Bone-in chops were particularly popular, as they were both flavorful and inexpensive. The slow cooking process allowed even the toughest cuts to become fork tender, absorbing the deep, savory notes of the seasoned gravy. Some cooks swore by a cast-iron skillet, while others let the dish simmer in a slow cooker for hours, ensuring the pork melted in your mouth. But as convenience foods and boneless, skinless meats took over the supermarket, this dish began to disappear. Quick-fix dinners replaced slow-simmered meals, and thick homemade gravies gave way to powdered mixes and canned alternatives. Today, smothered pork chops are a rare sight at the dinner table. But for those who remember the first bite of a perfectly tender chop covered in rich, peppery gravy, it's a dish worth revisiting. When a meal needed to be stretched as far as possible, soup was often the answer. Cabbage and dough soup was one of the simplest ways to turn a few humble ingredients into something warm, filling, and, on good days, almost satisfying. Cabbage was a Depression-era staple. It was cheap, hearty, and lasted longer than most vegetables. It didn't take much to turn it into soup, just water, salt, and maybe a bit of lard if it was available. But what made this dish unique was the dough. Instead of noodles or potatoes, families made quick, flour-based dumplings. A simple mix of flour and water, sometimes with a pinch of salt, was shaped into lumps and dropped into the boiling broth. The dough swelled as it cooked, making the pot seem fuller and the meal feel more substantial. Many immigrant families, particularly in Eastern Europe, had their own versions of this dish long before the Great Depression. But in America, it became a go-to meal when there was little else. For those who remember eating it, cabbage and dough soup was about getting through another day. It was a reminder that even when ingredients were scarce, a pot of boiling water and a little creativity could still feed a family. In Depression-era kitchens, sorghum syrup quietly became a valuable pantry staple, sweetening life just enough to make tough days tolerable. The sorghum and butter sandwich, featuring rich sorghum syrup generously spread alongside butter, illustrated precisely how clever Depression cooks stretched limited resources into meals both comforting and economical. Sorghum, extracted from cane-like plants widely cultivated across the rural South and Midwest, was more affordable and easier to produce than refined sugar. Interestingly, families often pressed and boiled their own sorghum syrup at community gatherings, turning it into a social event where neighbors pooled resources and swapped stories, a rare, bright spot amid hardship. Butter, though pricier and rationed carefully, complemented the syrup's earthy sweetness, elevating plain bread into something genuinely indulgent. Historical cookbooks and agricultural pamphlets praised sorghum for its robust nutritional value, humorously labeling it nature's sweetest medicine, a tagline that perhaps oversold its virtues, but only slightly. Modern Americans might see the combination of syrup and butter as simply a makeshift dessert, yet to depression families, it was an essential calorie boost, fueling long days of hard labor. Now, you might have never heard of something called grape catsup. How could you? After all, it's been totally forgotten now, but uncovering lost history and food at the same time is what we are here to do. So today, I'm going to start by bursting your ketchup bubble. Did you know that people used to make fruit-based ketchups besides just tomatoes? Stuff like grapes, which would usually be Concord or some other top-tier variety, were very popular back in the day. People even used to make the condiment out of mushrooms, whether or not you can believe it. It was actually about as popular as regular tomato ketchup is nowadays. People used to take mushrooms, salt and spices and vinegar and throw all that in to make a lovely little mushroom ketchup. So grapes, in comparison, can't be too out of pocket, right? Besides, it went with a lot of things, and it did a pretty good job of being a sidekick. The most common pairings for grape catsup would usually be roasted poultry and roasted duck, and that was because a lot of people thought that they were great as a condiment for those dishes. Plus, catsup is a little different because it's distinctly more aromatic than it is overwhelming, so it's always a joy to have around. Nowadays, it has seen a slightly small revival, but nothing big enough to really say it's back, you know? For those who knew where to look, springtime in the Appalachian woods meant one thing: ramps, a wild, pungent cousin of the leek that signaled the end of winter. Unlike their mild supermarket relatives, ramps packed a bold, garlicky punch, their flavor landing somewhere between onions and wild garlic. They were foraged, never farmed, popping up in shady forests where generations of families harvested them for their short but glorious season. Rich in vitamins and minerals, ramps were a much-needed nutritional boost after a long winter with limited fresh produce. Mountain communities sautéed them in bacon grease, folded them into cornbread, or pickled them for later use. In some towns, whole festivals were dedicated to them, celebrating their fleeting presence with feasts of fried potatoes, eggs, and ham, all infused with that unmistakable ramp flavor. So why did ramps nearly vanish? Popularity, ironically enough. As chefs and foodies rediscovered their bold taste, overharvesting took its toll. Unlike onions, ramps grow slowly and don't tolerate mass cultivation. Their increasing demand led to dwindling supplies, making them harder to find outside small, sustainable harvests. Some vegetables need constant replanting. Others take care of themselves. Egyptian walking onions, a hardy, self-propagating perennial, did exactly that. Instead of growing from the ground up like traditional onions, they formed clusters of small bulbs at the tops of their stalks. When the weight became too much, the stalks bent, planting the bulbs into the soil, giving the impression that these onions were walking across the garden. Farmers and homesteaders valued them for their reliability. Unlike standard onions that had to be replanted each season, Egyptian walking onions came back year after year, thriving in poor soil and harsh conditions. Their greens were harvested like scallions, while their underground bulbs were used just like regular onions. The flavor was sharp and pungent, making them ideal for soups, stews, and pickling. Some families even caramelized them for a rich, sweet onion spread. So why aren't they filling produce aisles today? Their irregular, unpredictable growth didn't fit the demands of large-scale farming. Unlike uniform, neatly packaged onions, these had a mind of their own, marching around the garden at their own pace. In times when every scrap of food was valued, rural kitchens found innovative ways to combine simple ingredients into meals that warmed both body and spirit. Cottage cheese and potato dumplings emerged as a testament to ingenuity born of necessity, utilizing readily available cottage cheese and leftover potatoes to create a dish that was as economical as it was nourishing. Families would mix mashed potatoes with a modest amount of cottage cheese, a source of protein that could be stored without elaborate refrigeration, to form soft dumplings, which were then simmered in a light broth. This method not only maximized resources, but also ensured that nothing went to waste, a crucial principle during leaner times. Historically, cottage cheese was accessible and affordable. often made at home or sourced from local dairies, while potatoes were a staple crop in many backyards. These dumplings provided a filling meal that required little more than basic cooking techniques and a dash of salt and herbs. One might say that in an era of scarcity, even a modest dumpling had the audacity to defy hunger, proving that flavor and sustenance could flourish on a shoestring budget. Moussaka is a rich, layered Greek casserole that marries slices of eggplant with ground meat and a creamy bechamel sauce. This dish has Middle Eastern origins but was perfected in its modern form by Greek chef Nikolaos Tselementes in the early 20th century. Preparing moussaka involves frying slices of eggplant, layering them with a spicy meat mixture traditionally made with lamb or beef, and then smothering it all under a luscious bechamel sauce. Once assembled, it's baked until the top turns a tempting golden brown, offering a deep, flavorful feast. Moussaka made a name for itself in Greek cuisine and entered American dining scenes in the mid-20th century, often served with a side salad or bread for a balanced, fulfilling dinner. Baking during the Great Depression often meant mastering the art of illusion. When apples were out of season or out of budget, clever cooks turned to crackers. That's how Ritz mock apple pie earned its spot in culinary history. Believe it or not, this dessert looked and tasted shockingly like real apple pie, yet didn't contain a single piece of fruit. The secret was in science. Crushed Ritz crackers mimicked the texture of cooked apples once baked, while a syrup made from sugar, water, cream of tartar, and lemon juice created the sweet, tart flavor that made it all convincing. The crackers absorbed the liquid, softened, and, like magic, transformed into something that fooled more than a few dinner guests. Even the texture of the filling closely resembled tender apple slices. This recipe first appeared on the back of Ritz cracker boxes in the 1930s, a time when processed foods were starting to appear in American kitchens, and innovation was born of need, not novelty. And in terms of reducing waste, it was a winner. No fruit to spoil, no peels to discard. While Ritz mock apple pie might puzzle younger generations today, it once stood as a prime example of Depression-era brilliance. A dessert made from pantry staples that could sweet-talk your taste buds into believing apples were never missing in the first place. Sole meunière is an exemplary dish that highlights the inherent flavors of its primary ingredient through a simple yet precise preparation method. This dish involves a sole fillet, lightly dusted with flour, then pan-fried in butter to a perfect golden brown. After cooking, the fillet is enhanced with a sauce of the pan's browned butter, fresh lemon juice, and chopped parsley, drizzled over the fish to amplify its delicate, sweet taste. The freshness and quality of the sole are crucial. Ideally, the fish is prepared soon after being caught, underscoring the importance of ingredient freshness in French culinary arts. The preparation focuses on preserving the fish's natural flavors, complemented subtly by the nutty browned butter and the bright lemon juice. Choosing sole, a flat fish valued for its fine texture and mild flavor, is vital as it cooks quickly and uniformly, making sole meunière a revered dish for its elegant simplicity. Long before store-bought bread was an everyday staple, cornmeal was the backbone of many working-class meals. Cheap, shelf-stable, and endlessly versatile, it found its way into countless recipes, none more practical than corn dodgers. These simple golden brown dumplings were either fried to crisp perfection or baked until firm, then served with a drizzle of syrup or a pat of butter. Corn dodgers were a direct descendant of Depression-era survival cooking, when wheat flour was too expensive for daily use. Cornmeal, on the other hand, was affordable and widely available, especially in the South and Midwest. Mixed with a little water, salt, and sometimes a splash of milk, it formed a dough sturdy enough to hold its shape in the frying pan. The result was a crispy on the outside, tender on the inside bite of pure comfort. Paired with a bit of molasses or honey, whatever was on hand, it became a meal that kids actually looked forward to. Some families made them dense and chewy, while others leaned toward a lighter, almost hush-puppy-like texture. However they were served, one thing was certain. Corn dodgers proved that even the simplest ingredients could be transformed into something satisfying. No frills, no waste, just good, honest food. Barberry was a widely available fruit that was actually seriously underrated. It wasn't as commonly cultivated in the United States. The barberry species that were consumed were usually found in abandoned homesteads, hedgerows, and rural landscapes. Barberries liked rocky soil that was poor in most regards. Maybe you can ask your grandparents what they know about barberry and report back. Barberries were actually these small, bright red fruits that grew in tightly packed clusters. They had a really strong tart flavor, with a citrus tang. Barberry had always been used in medicinal medicine as well, along with the bark and the roots. The berries contained a lot of berberine. I know that sounds like a Pokemon, but bear with me. This was a compound that was known for its antibacterial properties, and during times of illness, families would often brew barberry tea to help with digestive issues and help boost the strength of their immune system. That's really just what most of these fruits could do. Give you a few vitamins, help you with some burning pain, but overall, just make you stronger and disease-resistant from the inside. For decades, stuffed bell peppers were a staple of the American dinner table. They were practical, inexpensive, and packed with flavor. Families in the mid-20th century relied on simple, hearty meals, and this dish delivered. With just a few basic ingredients, ground beef, rice, tomatoes, and a well-seasoned filling, home cooks could create a meal that was both satisfying and visually appealing. Peppers were an accessible ingredient, easy to grow in backyard gardens and cheap at the store. Their natural shape made them the perfect edible container, eliminating the need for extra cookware. The filling, often stretched with rice to make the meat go further, was an economical way to feed a large family on a budget. Baked until tender, the peppers absorbed the savory juices, creating a dish that was both rustic and comforting. But as convenience foods took over, stuffed peppers began to fade from dinner rotations. The rise of prepackaged meals and fast food options meant fewer people were willing to spend time hollowing out peppers and slow baking a homemade filling. Today, the dish still makes an occasional appearance in nostalgic cookbooks, but it's no longer a household staple. When grocery money ran low, dinner didn't always come from the store. It came from the backyard. Dandelion greens and bacon fat was a meal born out of necessity, turning what many saw as a useless weed into a life-saving dish. Dandelions had long been a part of foraged diets, especially in rural areas where wild greens were free and packed with nutrients. The leaves were slightly bitter, but that's where bacon fat came in. A spoonful of leftover grease, saved from a previous meal, was melted down and drizzled over the greens, softening their bite and adding much-needed richness. A splash of vinegar or a pinch of salt helped balance the flavors, making it a dish that felt more substantial than its ingredients suggested. Foraging wasn't just a survival skill, it was a tradition. Families who lived through hard times knew how to turn the land into a resource, finding food where others saw nothing. During the Great Depression and wartime rationing, this simple dish meant the difference between going hungry and getting by. Coca-Cola chicken might just sound like the dumbest and most out-of-pocket thing as far as food recommendations go, but this is my hear me out. Coca-Cola chicken started off as being this attempt at making quirky fusion food that had a nice little sweet and savory twist to it. You know, something for both worlds. It was something that started to gain an incredible amount of upward momentum in the American South, especially in Chinese-American home cooking, as they were already fans of sticky chicken in their rice-based dishes. The dish also involved a lot of simmering chicken, which was usually some that was also common in Chinese cuisine. The basic mix was just Coca-Cola, soy sauce, ketchup, and then some barbecue sauce all put together in a neat little pan until it made the most decadent and fizzy glaze you had ever seen. The Coca-Cola is supposed to reduce down, but while it does that, it creates a sweetness that's almost reminiscent of molasses. It's not really quite the same, but it has a lot of hints of vanilla and spice coming in. Despite what you might expect, this dish actually has a decent amount of umami to it as well, and a tang that makes you want to come back for more and more. In Depression-era America, homemakers learned quickly that flavor often resided in the drippings left in their skillets. Bacon grease, now casually discarded, was prized as liquid gold, giving rise to imaginative dishes like the lettuce and bacon grease sandwich. At first glance, combining crisp lettuce with bacon drippings might seem contradictory, like ordering a diet soda with your large fries, but during the lean 1930s, it made perfect sense. Bacon, when affordable, provided protein, but every precious drop of rendered fat was meticulously saved in kitchen jars for future meals. Lettuce, on the other hand, was a garden-friendly crop, inexpensive and abundant, offering essential freshness and vitamins. Clever cooks of the time combined these humble ingredients, lightly dressing freshly picked lettuce leaves in warm bacon grease, sprinkling them with salt, then sandwiching them between bread slices. Surprisingly delicious, the grease transformed mundane lettuce into something savory and satisfying. Historical cookbooks and government-issued pamphlets frequently promoted bacon fat as an affordable seasoning, suggesting it could practically perform culinary miracles. Not quite a turnip, not quite a cabbage, rutabaga is the vegetable world's best-kept secret. This hearty root, a cross between the two, was once a staple in American kitchens, especially during the Great Depression and both World Wars. Cheap, filling, and easy to grow, rutabagas were a lifesaver when other crops failed. They stored well through the winter, making them a reliable choice for families who needed food that would last. Cooks often treated them like potatoes, mashing them with butter or roasting them for a caramelized sweetness. In Scandinavian countries, they were turned into Swede mash, a creamy, comforting side dish, while in the US, they found their way into stews, casseroles, and even pasties. Their mild, slightly sweet flavor made them versatile, though their reputation as poverty food didn't do them any favors. As grocery store aisles filled with pre-packaged, ready-to-cook vegetables, rutabagas slowly disappeared from dinner tables. Their rough, wax-coated exterior wasn't as inviting as polished potatoes, and peeling them required a little more effort. Over time, they became a relic of the past, remembered mostly in rural areas and among those who still grow their own food. The tail end of harvest season, when frost threatened the garden and red tomatoes were still a few days off, resourceful cooks didn't panic. They picked what they had. That's when green tomato pie became a clever, last-ditch way to avoid waste and still put dessert on the table. Surprisingly sweet and often mistaken for apple pie, this dish turned unripened tomatoes into a spiced filling that mimicked fruit with uncanny success. Sliced green tomatoes were layered with sugar, cinnamon, and a touch of vinegar or lemon juice to balance the tang. Some versions added raisins or a bit of flour to thicken the filling, and the mixture was tucked between two pie crusts, just like any traditional fruit pie. It was frugal, yes, but also surprisingly flavorful, which made it a well-kept secret in rural households for generations. Not everyone knew what they were eating, and sometimes it was better that way. "Eat first, ask later," was a common refrain when guests took their first bite. With tomatoes too hard to slice for sandwiches and too green to can, this pie reduced garden waste and stretched dessert possibilities during tougher months. Chicken divan is all about comfort, featuring chicken and broccoli smothered in a creamy cheese sauce, baked to perfection. It originated in the early 20th century at the Divan Parisien restaurant in New York City, named for the very place that concocted it. Initially designed as a showcase of the chef's skills in French cooking, chicken divan made its mark in the mid-20th century as a dish that blended sophistication with simplicity. To make it, layer cooked chicken and broccoli in a baking dish, pour over a sauce made from butter, flour, cream, and cheese, and bake until it's golden and bubbly. This dish is a testament to the fusion of French culinary art with the comfort of American home cooking, creating a truly delightful dish. Before lemons were regularly stocked in every grocery store, and long before bottled juice became a staple, resourceful cooks had to fake the flavor they craved. That's how mock lemon pie became a quiet legend in frugal kitchens across America. Devised during wartime shortages and Depression-era scrimping, this pie delivered the tang of citrus without a single lemon in sight. The trick was vinegar, Mixed with sugar, water, a bit of flour or cornstarch, and a dash of butter, it created a filling that mimicked the sharp, sweet punch of lemon curd. A sprinkle of nutmeg or a touch of vanilla helped round out the illusion. Poured into a simple pie crust, often made with lard or shortening, it was baked until set and served with pride. This wasn't deception, it was adaptation. Lemons were expensive and hard to come by in inland or rural areas, especially in winter. Vinegar, on the other hand, was affordable, shelf-stable, and always on hand. As one cook put it, "It's not lemon, but it sure fooled the kids." Mock lemon pie wasn't a second-best option. It was a testament to making do without giving up flavor. When money was tight and protein was rationed, many households turned to broths and soups to stretch ingredients further than they were ever meant to go. Depression-era egg drop. Soup was one of those quietly brilliant solutions, a meal that could be made in minutes using little more than water, a bouillon cube, and a single egg. It was a dish where the egg wasn't the main attraction. It was the luxury swirl in an otherwise humble bowl. This version of egg drop soup didn't call for ginger, sesame oil, or scallions like the versions served in Chinese restaurants. Instead, it reflected the pantry of a 1930s American household. Simple broth made from scraps or cubes, sometimes thickened slightly with flour or cornstarch, and flavored with pepper or a dash of vinegar if anything else was around. The egg was beaten, then slowly drizzled in, forming silky ribbons the moment it hit the simmering liquid. For many, this was both starter and main course, light in ingredients, but filling enough to serve its purpose. The egg added vital protein, and the soup helped stretch limited groceries over one more day. Though Depression-era egg drop soup rarely appears in cookbooks today, it once offered warmth, nourishment, and a quiet reminder that even the simplest meals could bring comfort in uncertain times. Veal Prince Orloff is a lavish dish that captures the essence of French-Russian culinary elegance, named after the Russian diplomat Prince Orloff, who resided in France during the 19th century. Created by the renowned French chef Urbain Dubois, it aims to impress with its sophisticated layering and flavors. The dish features slices of roasted veal loin alternated with layers of sautéed mushrooms and onions, with slices of Mornay sauce-enriched eggplant interspersed throughout. It is then crowned with more Mornay sauce, baked until bubbly and golden. This intricate preparation not only showcases the delicate flavors of veal, but also the creamy texture of the Mornay sauce, making it a dish that stands out in both taste and presentation. When money was tight, dinner often came down to whatever was left in the pantry. A bag of egg noodles, a bottle of ketchup, and a bit of margarine. That was all it took to put a meal on the table. Ketchup and egg noodles weren't gourmet, but they were quick, cheap, and filling. Egg noodles were a working-class staple, cheaper than other pasta and often bought in bulk. Ketchup, always within arm's reach in American households, doubled as an instant sauce, adding a tangy sweetness that made the dish feel a little less plain. A pat of margarine, more affordable than butter, gave the noodles just enough richness to round everything out. The result? A meal that may not have won any awards but kept bellies full. Dishes like this weren't about taste as much as practicality. They came together in minutes, required no special skills, and could be made by kids home alone after school. Some families added a sprinkle of black pepper, while others stirred in a little sugar to cut the acidity of the ketchup. For those who grew up eating it, the memory of steaming hot noodles coated in that unmistakable red sauce brings back a time when dinner didn't have to be complicated, it just had to get the job done. Canned tuna, condensed soup, and a box of cornflakes. 3 pantry staples that, when combined, became a casserole that defined weeknight dinners for countless families. Cornflake tuna bake was born out of necessity, a way to stretch ingredients while still delivering something warm and filling. Tuna was one of the cheapest proteins available, packed with enough nutrition to make it a practical substitute for more expensive meats. Condensed mushroom soup, a mid-century kitchen essential, served as a creamy binder that brought everything together without the need for extra seasonings or fresh dairy. And then there were the cornflakes, a crunchy, golden topping that gave the dish just the right amount of texture, elevating it beyond just another casserole. Easy to assemble and requiring little effort beyond mixing, layering, and baking, it was the kind of meal that could be thrown together in minutes. Some families added peas or onions, while others stuck to the basics. No matter the variation, it was a staple on dinner tables across America, feeding hungry families without stretching the grocery budget too far. For those who grew up on it, the sight of that bubbly golden crust coming out of the oven is a memory tied to simpler times. Speaking of nostalgia, nothing brings back childhood memories of visiting Grams quite like some old-fashioned bread pudding. Every time there was stale bread on the counter, we knew Grandma was going to make some delicious bread pudding. This dessert became known as poor man's pudding because it was affordable. The best part about this one? You could add your own twist with toppings like raisins, chocolate chips, nuts, or fruit. While Grandma's bread pudding might have a classic American twist, this dish had international cousins. In France, it was known as pain perdu, which meant lost bread. In the UK, it was sometimes called bread and butter pudding. And in Mexico, there was a version called capirotada, which was traditionally eaten during Lent. Sadly, we're in the era of croissants and pastries, and this simple sweet treat can't compete with the fancies. Still, if you've got some bread, milk, and sugar at home, there's no better or easier way to use up the leftovers. Dust off your grandma's old cookbooks, and you might just find her exact secret recipe. Side dishes were once as thoughtfully prepared as the main course, and few were as simple yet elegant as a well-roasted carrot medley. Coated in honey, butter, and a hint of cinnamon, this dish was a staple at homecoming dinners, adding a touch of natural sweetness to balance out heavier meats and casseroles. Carrots were a practical choice for home cooks. They were cheap, easy to store, and available year-round, making them a kitchen essential. Roasting them brought out their natural sugars, and when paired with honey and warm spices, they became more than just a side dish. They were a highlight. Some versions used maple syrup instead, while others incorporated fresh herbs for a more savory twist. No matter the variation, the result was always a vibrant, glossy medley of tender carrots with a flavor profile that felt both nostalgic and indulgent. As processed vegetable sides and microwave-steamed bags took over grocery store shelves, many home cooks stopped roasting vegetables altogether. Instead of taking the time to caramelize their natural flavors, people opted for pre-cut and pre-cooked options. When sugar was too expensive and food had to stretch, people turned to what was available. Molasses milk was a simple but effective way to add some much-needed energy to the day. Molasses was a pantry staple in many homes, especially in the South, where sugarcane processing made it cheap and accessible. It lasted longer than sugar, had essential minerals like iron and calcium, and most importantly, it was affordable. Families would stir a spoonful into a glass of milk, creating a slightly sweet, slightly bitter drink that packed more nutrients than plain milk alone. Some even believed it had health benefits, making it an early version of a fortified drink. This wasn't just a product of the Depression. It had been around for generations. In farming communities, molasses was often used as a sweetener when refined sugar was too costly. Children drank it before heading to school, and laborers relied on it for an energy boost before a long day of work. For those who grew up with it, molasses milk was a taste of childhood, a reminder of tough but resourceful times. It wasn't fancy, but it was proof that sometimes all you needed was a little sweetness to get through the day. Among the unlikely culinary heroes of the Great Depression was a sandwich featuring sliced tomatoes sprinkled lightly with sugar, the tomato and sugar sandwich. Tomatoes, easy to grow and abundant in backyard gardens, were embraced as a budget-friendly food staple during hard economic times. This sandwich cleverly paired the natural acidity of ripe tomatoes with a touch of sweetness, making them appealing enough even for skeptical children. Surprisingly, sugar, though carefully rationed, was frequently recommended in 1930s homemaking guides as a versatile flavor enhancer, transforming humble ingredients into tastier meals. Newspapers even promoted tomatoes as the perfect vegetable for cash-strapped families, humorously dubbing them poor man's oranges, due to their vibrant color and juicy interior. Combining tomatoes and sugar wasn't just a quirky experiment, it was practical ingenuity. Sweetening tomatoes masked their tartness, giving them broader culinary appeal and preventing precious produce from going to waste. Modern taste buds might initially find the concept puzzling. After all, tomato sandwiches traditionally call for mayonnaise and salt, but Depression-era cooks weren't afraid to rewrite culinary rules if it meant saving pennies. Salt-rising bread is a pretty unique kind of bread. It's actually something that dates back all the way to the 17th and 18th centuries, and it was originally said to have come from the Appalachian region. So the name of this recipe might make you think that the salt here is what makes the bread, rise. It is not actually used as a leavening agent, but it refers to a technique that was popular back then. People used to leave bread on beds of heated salt so that they would be kept warm. Now, I'm not sure this was in our grandparents' time period. They're old, but not that old. Back to the bread, though. This is a really cheesy bread with an unusually dense crumb. It has a texture that's very unique to it, which I can only describe as a very vintage bread that's been kept warm just perpetually. It used to be a real hit back in the day, but maybe this is one you guys would debate bringing this back? It's not winning any beauty contests, but what celeriac lacks in looks, it makes up for in flavor. This knobby, rough-skinned root may not be as recognizable as its leafy cousin celery, but for generations, it was a cold-weather staple, valued for its ability to store well through the harshest winters. Beneath its gnarled exterior, celeriac offers a mild, slightly nutty taste, with the unmistakable essence of celery, making it a versatile addition to soups, stews, and purees. Unlike celery, which was mostly grown for its stalks, celeriac was all about the root. Cooks would peel away the thick skin, revealing a crisp white interior, perfect for roasting, mashing, or slicing into slaws. In France, it was famously used in celeriac remoulade, a simple but elegant salad tossed with mustard and mayonnaise. In colder regions, it was boiled and mashed like potatoes, offering a hearty alternative with fewer carbs. But as modern farming prioritized uniformity and ease of preparation, celeriac fell behind. Its irregular shape made it difficult to peel, and with grocery stores favoring picture-perfect produce, this knobby root was gradually forgotten. When budgets were tight and dinner had to come from whatever was in the pantry, few dishes offered the same comfort and convenience as creamed peas on toast. This humble meal became a regular fixture in American kitchens, especially during the Great Depression and wartime rationing. Canned peas, cheap, shelf-stable, and widely available, paired with a basic white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, could transform yesterday's bread into something that actually felt like a meal. It wasn't fancy, but that was the point. Toast, often made from the day-old loaf that was too dry for sandwiches, became the perfect base. The sauce stretched the peas just far enough to feed a family, and a pinch of salt and pepper gave it enough flavor to keep complaints to a minimum. Well, most of the time. As some kids joked, creamed peas again? Must be Wednesday. In truth, dishes like this were all about maximizing what was on hand. Rather than toss out stale bread or wait for fresh vegetables, families made do and made it work. The meal's simplicity masked its real strength, the ability to stretch limited ingredients into something warm, filling, and economical. Veal marsala is an elegant Italian dish that features tender veal cutlets simmered in a rich marsala wine sauce. Originating in Sicily, where marsala wine has been a staple since the 18th century, this dish made a splash in Italian-American kitchens in the mid-20th century. The classic method involves lightly flouring the veal cutlets, then pan-frying them in butter until they're beautifully browned. The magic happens when the pan is deglazed with marsala wine, adding mushrooms and sometimes cream to create a sauce that's both sweet and savory. As Italian restaurants in America evolved to showcase regional specialties, veal marsala emerged as a sophisticated favorite, commonly served with pasta or potatoes to enhance the tender veal with its robust marsala sauce. Corn was once the backbone of the rural American diet, and families knew how to make it work in just about every form imaginable. One of the most enduring and economical ways to stretch a bag of cornmeal was cornmeal mush with molasses. This dish, deceptively simple, was a staple on tables from Appalachia to the Midwest, especially during times when sugar was scarce and grocery lists were kept intentionally short. Cornmeal mush started with just 2 ingredients: cornmeal and water. Stirred over heat until thick and smooth, it could be poured into a pan to set, then sliced and fried the next day. But when served hot and fresh, a drizzle of molasses turned it into a breakfast or supper that offered comfort without cost. Molasses, often cheaper than refined sugar, added a deep sweetness, and more importantly, iron and minerals to a meal otherwise made from little. It was filling, adaptable, and incredibly frugal. Any leftovers could be reused, making it a true zero-waste option in kitchens where every scoop mattered. As one old saying went, mush in the morning meant no one went hungry by night. Though cornmeal mush with molasses has largely disappeared from modern mealtimes, it once stood as a symbol of how far a penny's worth of grain and a spoonful of syrup could carry a family. Minted lamb with jelly brings together the rich, robust flavors of roasted lamb with the refreshing zest of mint jelly, making it a quintessential British dish often featured during spring and Easter celebrations. The long-standing tradition of pairing mint with lamb dates back to medieval England, where the herb's sprightly flavor was used to complement the lamb's slight gaminess. The preparation typically involves roasting a leg or shoulder of lamb, seasoned liberally with salt, pepper, and often aromatic garlic and rosemary, ensuring the meat is juicy and tender. The mint jelly, a blend of mint, sugar, and vinegar, offers a sweet and tangy counterpoint that enhances the meat's deep flavors. This dish exemplifies the classic British culinary technique of marrying robust meat with a vibrant, acidic condiment to create a balanced and satisfying dining experience. Cabbage was a lifesaver for working-class families. It was cheap, filling, and could be stretched into countless meals. But one of the more unusual ways it made it to the dinner table was in the form of a baked pudding. Boiled cabbage mixed with eggs and flour, then baked until firm and sliced like meatloaf. It may not have looked like much, but for families on a tight budget, cabbage pudding was a way to turn simple ingredients into something hearty and satisfying. Eggs provided the structure, binding everything together while adding much-needed protein. Flour thickened the mixture, giving it a firm texture that could be sliced and served like a main course. The cabbage itself, soft from boiling, took on a milder flavor, making it an easy dish to pair with whatever else was on hand. Some families seasoned it with a bit of salt and pepper, while others added a splash of milk for extra richness. For those who grew up on it, this dish was part of a long tradition of making the most out of humble ingredients. Whether eaten hot from the oven or reheated the next day, it was proof that even the simplest vegetables could be transformed into something filling, practical, and, at least for some, comforting. One of the finest dishes we ever got as a result of the crock-pot was the famous Amish 6-layer dinner. Just like Kentucky Fried Chicken gets a lot of attention for those infamous 13 secret ingredients, this dish too only has 6 ingredients that make up all the magic. You have your onions, ground beef, carrots, tomatoes, and then a layer of seasoning and broth. You layer this up in a casserole dish, bake it until the vegetables are the definition of soft and tender, and enjoy the healthiest and tastiest casserole you've ever had. Simple does it, right? That advice has carried kings to their empires, and it'll carry you to a wonderful dinner if you take it. You don't need to pre-cook anything, as everything goes into one casserole. This dish gets the Amish association because, as you may have guessed, it got pretty popular in those communities and places with farming traditions. More people started adopting it when people had an interest in the many cuisines that different communities in America had, like the Amish and Midwestern traditions. The era where this dish got popular, the 1950s to 1970s, was a time marked by an increasing population and birth rate. People had larger families, and cheap, affordable ways to feed everyone were immediate hits with the masses. Lamb was a prized centerpiece of homecoming feasts and holiday gatherings. Its deep, rich flavor and fall-apart tenderness made it a dish reserved for special occasions, especially in families with European or Mediterranean roots. Slow roasting a lamb shoulder with garlic and fresh herbs was a time-honored tradition. Lamb was once far more common on American dinner tables than it is today. In the early 20th century, it was an affordable alternative to beef and pork, particularly in rural areas where small-scale farming was the norm. Shoulder cuts were especially budget-friendly, benefiting from long, slow cooking to break down tough fibers. Roasted low and slow with rosemary, thyme, and whole cloves of garlic, the meat absorbed deep, aromatic flavors while becoming melt-in-your-mouth tender. So why did it disappear from everyday meals? As industrial farming shifted American preferences toward beef and chicken, lamb fell out of favor. It became harder to find in grocery stores, and for many home cooks, its distinctive flavor was an acquired taste. Faster, more convenient proteins replaced slow-cooked roasts, and over time, this once popular dish faded into obscurity. Food waste wasn't an option when every scrap mattered. That's why even something as overlooked as potato peels had a purpose. Potato peels fried in fat took what most people would toss and turned it into a crispy, flavorful snack, or, on tougher days, a full meal. Potatoes were already a staple in struggling households. They were cheap, filling, and could last for months in storage. But the real ingenuity came in using the peels. Instead of discarding them, families saved the scraps and fried them in leftover bacon grease or lard until golden brown. A sprinkle of salt, if available, made them taste even better. Some even added vinegar for a tangy kick, mimicking the flavor of potato chips before they became a common snack. During the Great Depression and wartime rationing, people had to make do with every part of an ingredient. The peels contained nutrients that couldn't be wasted, and frying them in fat added the calories needed to get through the day. For those who grew up eating them, potato peels fried in fat was a lesson in resourcefulness. It proved that even the parts of food most would throw away could be turned into something warm, crispy, and, at least for a moment, satisfying. In a time when food waste was practically unthinkable, even potato scraps found their way onto dinner tables as an ingenious sandwich filling known as the fried potato peel sandwich. During the Great Depression, resourcefulness wasn't just admired, it was essential for survival. Potato peels, typically discarded today without a second glance, became the surprise stars of family meals when frugal cooks discovered that frying them crisp and sprinkling a touch of salt transformed kitchen waste into an affordable delicacy. Potatoes were abundant, inexpensive, and nutritious, making them a cornerstone of Depression-era cooking. Yet their peels often held valuable nutrients, something homemakers recognized instinctively, long before modern nutritionists praised potato skins as vitamin-packed. Clever cooks stretched resources by saving these peelings, crisping them to crunchy perfection, and layering them between slices of bread for a sandwich that was satisfying, flavorful, and, importantly, dirt cheap. Remarkably, newspapers and food columns of the 1930s openly suggested frying potato peels to add bulk and nutrition to scarce diets, turning desperation into culinary inspiration. Red flannel hash is a really rustic dish that comes from some of the best and most familiar ingredients known to Americans. You have yourself all the typical classics here, man. We got corned beef, potatoes, and beets, so take your pick. It's definitely giving Southern this time around. Now, this dish has a lot of savory notes going on because the hash is packed with umami while the briny depth from the corned beef really contrasts it and makes a complex flavor profile. The cured and intense beefy flavor is something that only gets accentuated by the use of mustard seed and peppercorn. Sorry, did this turn into a food analysis channel? This was basically just old-school comfort food, and it was the type of thing your grandparents would come back to or make for each other with a lot of life. The first bite is perfect for savory lovers, but it keeps having something for everyone as you go along. For centuries, before the potato took center stage in kitchens across the world, another root vegetable quietly dominated the dinner table. Skirret, a sweet, multi-rooted plant, was once a favorite among European settlers and early American farmers. Unlike the starchy single-tuber potato, skirret produced clusters of thin, white roots, packed with natural sugars and a subtle nutty flavor. Highly valued for its cold tolerance, skirret thrived in poor soil, and survived harsh winters when other crops failed. Cooks found endless ways to use it. Boiled, roasted, or mashed, it was a versatile ingredient that paired well with butter and spices. Some families even treated it like a parsnip, adding it to stews, while others blended it into fritters or pies for a naturally sweet bite. So why did this once beloved vegetable disappear? The answer is simple: efficiency. Skirret, with its delicate interwoven roots, was far trickier to harvest and clean than a bulky potato. When large-scale farming favored high-yield crops, skirret was quietly replaced. Today, it's nearly forgotten outside heirloom gardening circles, but for those who rediscover it, the reward is undeniable. During the leanest decades of the 20th century, resourcefulness in the kitchen wasn't just admired, it was expected. That's how liver loaf earned its place at the table. Organ meats like liver were inexpensive, packed with nutrients, and widely available at butcher shops, making them a practical choice for families looking to stretch their food budgets without sacrificing nutrition. Turning liver into a loaf wasn't just a culinary choice, it was a financial strategy. Ground liver was blended with breadcrumbs, eggs, onions, and sometimes a splash of milk, whatever was on hand, to create a dense, sliceable loaf. It resembled meatloaf in appearance, but had a distinct flavor that earned strong opinions in both directions. Some called it hearty, others politely passed it to the dog under the table. Either way, it got eaten. In terms of nutrition, liver loaf punched well above its weight, rich in iron, vitamin A, and protein at a time when supplements weren't sitting in everyone's medicine cabinet. And let's not forget the no-waste mentality. Using every part of the animal was standard practice, not an ethical trend. Families made it work because they had to, not because they wanted a cooking challenge. Salmon kalibiak is a dish of luxury, with salmon fillet wrapped in puff pastry, along with rice and mushrooms, originating from Russia, where it's known as kulebyaka. The name stems from the Russian word for a type of rich, filled pie. The traditional setup lays a seasoned salmon fillet on a bed of cooked rice and mushrooms, then envelops it in puff pastry, which bakes to a golden flakiness. This dish became popular in the banquet menus of European royalty and was featured in several Russian novels. Celebrated in France during the 19th century and beloved for special occasions, salmon kalibiak is often served with vegetables or a light salad. The blend of ingredients inside the pastry creates a sophisticated, hearty meal that showcases the culinary crossover between Russian robustness and French finesse. In kitchens where dimes were stretched and grocery trips were rare, even the simplest ingredients had to serve double duty. That's where cabbage and bread soup proved its worth. A dish that combined two of the most affordable pantry staples into a meal that was both warming and filling, if not exactly flashy. When meat was missing and stock pots were light, this soup stepped in to do the heavy lifting. The method was modest but effective. Chopped cabbage simmered in water or weak broth, sometimes flavored with onion or garlic if available. Stale bread was cubed or torn and added in, acting as both thickener and sustenance. A drizzle of fat, bacon grease, butter, or lard might have been added for richness, but even without it, this soup got the job done. Cabbage was prized for its long shelf life and high yield per penny, while bread that had gone dry was never tossed. It was repurposed. Together, they made a dish that respected every scrap, every cent, and every ounce of effort. Long before flavored syrups lined grocery store shelves, families with tight budgets found simpler and cheaper ways to sweeten their milk. One of the most common was molasses milk, a straightforward mix of whole milk and a spoonful of blackstrap molasses. It wasn't just a drink. It was a dose of nutrition disguised as a treat, especially for kids growing up in rural America. Blackstrap molasses, a byproduct of sugar refining, was affordable, shelf-stable, and rich in iron, calcium, magnesium, and potassium. That made it especially valuable during the Great Depression and wartime years, when vitamin supplements were a luxury few could afford. A splash of molasses in a glass of milk provided a quick energy boost and a touch of sweetness in an otherwise plain cup. In households where sugar was rationed or too expensive to use freely, molasses stepped in. And since both milk and molasses were commonly available on farms, it became an accessible comfort drink for many. Some versions were served warm in colder months, almost like a rustic cousin to hot cocoa, while others were stirred cold and gulped down at breakfast. Though molasses milk has quietly slipped out of modern rotation, it once stood as a practical answer to limited options, offering both nourishment and a bit of comfort at a time when both were in short supply. In a time, peach chicken became popular in the 1970s, aligning with an American trend of integrating fruit into savory dishes. This recipe combines the natural sweetness of peaches with the savory depth of chicken, creating a delightful contrast. Browned chicken pieces are simmered with fresh or canned peaches, with ginger and cinnamon adding a layer of spice that complements the sweetness. Additional peach preserves or syrup can be added to enrich the sauce, deepening the dish's flavor profile. A splash of bourbon or brandy is sometimes included, lending a smoky nuance. The sauce is typically thickened with a cornstarch slurry, producing a glossy finish that adheres beautifully to the chicken. This dish illustrates the versatility of chicken as a canvas for flavor, adeptly marrying the sweet with the savory in a uniquely American culinary experiment. There was a time when dinner didn't come from a drive-thru or a frozen box. It came from whatever was on hand. In kitchens where budgets were tight and grocery trips were limited, a humble combination of eggs, milk, flour, and butter could transform into something that filled bellies without emptying wallets. So how was egg sauce on saltines made? Hard-boiled eggs were mashed into a simple white sauce, thickened just enough to spoon over a stack of saltine crackers. It wasn't glamorous, but it got the job done. Eggs were a working-class staple, packed with protein and cheap enough to buy by the dozen. A basic white sauce, made from milk, flour, and butter, was the foundation of countless Depression-era and post-war meals, stretching ingredients without overpowering them. Crackers, those were always in the pantry, whether for soup, snacks, or in this case, an entire meal. Families who couldn't afford fresh bread every day turned to saltines as a substitute, their crisp texture adding just enough bite to an otherwise soft dish. It may not have been the most exciting dinner, but it was warm, filling, and familiar. Kids ate it without fuss. Parents appreciated how far it stretched, and for those who grew up on it, the taste is forever linked to simpler times. This is probably the best proof of how stress-free a crock pot can be. When your cooking gets so simple that your dish gets called no-peak chicken because you literally don't need to even glance at it, you know you need to invest in one of these bad boys. This dish takes chicken breasts and works some real magic with them, but the real star of this show is the canned products. Canned mushrooms and soups are put into a dish with a broth, then covered with foil and baked. The rice absorbs all the liquid, and the chicken soaks in that lovely flavor. It gets really mushy in the process, and that means it's perfect for you to sink your teeth into after a long day. It got popular because it was one of those dump-and-bake recipes. It took nothing. You wouldn't work up a sweat making it, and everything you needed for it was available at your nearest convenience store. Casserole culture in general started skyrocketing from the 1950s to the 1980s, and this was one of the staples of that time. It's a win-win situation for everyone when your country's classics are made even easier and more accessible thanks to nifty new machines, and people definitely took as much advantage of that fact as they could. Leftover turkey was once the foundation of creative home cooking. Long before frozen dinners and deli slices, resourceful cooks found ways to repurpose every part of a roasted bird. One of the most inventive solutions? A golden, bubbling gratin that transformed shredded turkey into something just as satisfying as the holiday feast itself. Sweet potatoes, naturally rich and slightly sweet, paired perfectly with the savory depth of turkey. Thinly sliced and layered, they acted as both a starch and a built-in flavor enhancer. A cheesy herbed cream sauce seeped into every bite, bringing a velvety richness that made this dish feel indulgent despite its humble origins. Some families added a pinch of nutmeg for warmth, while others topped it with breadcrumbs for a golden, crispy finish. For decades, this dish was a practical way to extend a meal and avoid food waste. Turkey was affordable, especially in the days when whole birds were purchased rather than pre-packaged cuts. Sweet potatoes, widely available and inexpensive, provided both nutrition and flavor. As quick-fix meals and processed leftovers became the norm, dishes requiring careful layering and slow baking lost their appeal. For generations, mock apple pie is another delicious dessert that clicked with masses across the nations during rough times. As apples were getting expensive, people were looking for cheaper alternatives. That is when the mock apple pie entered. Resemblance is one thing, but if the pie looks and tastes like it, then it might as well be an apple pie. Created using cheap and the nation favorite Ritz crackers, mixing those with some vanilla syrup, sprinkle some lemon and cinnamon to create a perfect home-baked pie fit to rival apple pie. The Depression era onwards really saw an explosion in its popularity. We cannot really blame people either. Fresh, juicy apples were in hot demand and short supply. The pie was just as cheap as Hoover stew and easy to make. Nowadays, of course, you would not find this in houses you go to, despite it being popular enough that Ritz had instructions on the back of the box on how to make it. That wraps up 2 hours of dirt-cheap recipes your grandparents used to survive. Drop your favorite in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.